All right. Welcome back, Jerry. Welcome back, everyone. Again, this is Geri Bernard from The Glowing Self. And we're coming back together today because we opened up a conversation about relationships last week. And now, while relationships can be one of the most beneficial parts of our life, one of the most necessary parts of our life, they can also be one of the hardest and most vulnerable. And last week, we were together talking about self awareness, how our experiences can bring us forward to this point in time, and then how we can take whatever has happened, whether it is bright and sunshiny or it's really full of pain, and start to turn that into something new for ourselves and our lives and let it morph into an arena in which we can come together with other people and become the people that we want to be. Today, Jerry is going to take us further into this conversation, into the art of difficult conversations, into conscious communication, and we're going to acknowledge why this is hard, why this is vulnerable, where so many of us might be beginning from that might not feel like this is an easy place to start, and how to get from this place of fear and challenge and difficulty to a place where we can actually start to apply some of what Jerry's going to share with us today. So, Jerry's here today to offer us strategy and resources, as always, because that's why this podcast exists. Jerry, welcome back.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Ashley. I think what you're bringing up about how it's hard is so universal, right? It's just how it's hard for you.
If you think about what we were talking about last week with like actually having a vocabulary for our emotions, which most of us lack,
Right.
not because there's something wrong with
Right.
us or we're unintelligent. Even the most intelligent people tend to have a very limited vocabulary around words and feeling. And so just opening up this conversation is like, hey, you might have a different sensory experience than the person standing next to you. And just to like consider that and to be able to validate it and go, oh, well, that might make sense of why this is hard for me, but it's not hard for my partner, or my best friend struggles with this and I don't, but oh, okay. Yeah. Like, 'cause our felt experience, both physically and emotionally, can be very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where having emotional awareness leads to emotional agility and being able to understand what's happening in your world, right? So if we were to look at the feelings wheel and we see the seven core emotions, and then you're going to see language that's going to sort of parse those emotions out into different tiers. And it's
Yeah.
really a great activity because you hit on it, Ash. Last week you were saying that a lot of people can think of those basic ones, right?
Yeah.
Sad, mad, happy.
Yeah.
Those are usually the ones that people hit on. There's a lot of emotions that we experience. And a lot of what we find is that people aren't learning in their, whether it's in their families or in school, that it's okay. And it's actually the most human thing to have the full spectrum of emotions.
Yeah.
And so that messaging we pick up throughout our lives is what is creating the framework for us in our
Absolutely.
relationships.
Yes, and if you look at the differences male and female, and you think about it's okay to feel that, just to expand on that, it's like
Right.
typical male acculturation says
Right.
don't
What does
show, don't
society
express, don't
say?
feel sadness. And for females, it's don't show, don't feel, don't express anger. That does not mean that was the message that you adopted in your smaller cultures. But, in general ways, we've all received messages, whether or not we are adopting and abiding by. So Jerry, how can we start to take what we've been discussing about this, like understanding ourselves, understanding what we're feeling, understanding where we've come from in our relationships historically, to begin to look at like where we are today so that we could take this understanding of the past and knowing ourselves to make our present relationships better, make them feel maybe more safe, make them feel more comfortable, make communication feel comfortable. And I cringe a little as I say it because I have come from so many struggles and challenges myself, which may or may not surprise people. Like, therapists are human beings. The difficult conversation thing for me, hard. I have a
Yeah.
lot of friends who have a lot of Aries in their chart and a lot of Leo in their chart, and they are like never struggling with this. And I was the opposite. So
Yeah.
having hard conversations for me is something that I've learned to do, and I've had to really challenge
Yeah.
those boundaries and walls, I should say, not boundaries, I've put up around
Yeah.
conversation and communication and relationships to get to a place of going, oh, yeah, this has value. This is safe. I am okay. This
Mhm.
makes things
Mhm.
feel more safe, more okay, and
Yeah.
it improves things. But I know what it was like being way back here. And first of all, not even realizing I wasn't having the communication to a place of awareness, which is the most uncomfortable place to be, where you're
Mhm.
aware that there's something you want to be different, you maybe want to say, but you don't feel ready to do that and
Yeah.
say it to actually get to this
Yeah.
place of doing it, which is, why you're here today. You're taking us through this journey. So I'm excited for you to be able to expand
Yeah.
on this.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited too. This can be something that's difficult no matter where you are on the emotional spectrum or understanding your emotional world. It's really about just starting there.
Mm.
One of the questions that's a really great thing to ask yourself, no matter where you are, no matter
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you are learning about yourself in this journey of self awareness, is what messages did I learn about emotional sharing in my family of
Mm,
origin? Right?
yeah.
And so this is where we can start to understand how we are processing our emotions is here because this is
Yeah.
where we learned it. So we first have to look at our history. Well, what did I learn about sharing? What did I learn was okay to feel? What did I learn was not okay to feel?
Yeah.
How quickly was I made to think, okay, you got to figure this out, right? Because we're humans. Our
Yeah.
parents were humans. They were doing the best they could with what they had. And so now this is the cool part. We as adults get to go, okay, maybe I learned that anger was okay, but sadness wasn't.
Yeah.
And so what we can do is gain more understanding of, am I an external or internal processor or a combination of both? For
Mm.
example, for me, I am clearly an external processor. It feels really comfortable for my system for me to talk through what I'm experiencing.
Everyone,
And
Jerry
what
says clearly because we are on a special text thread referred to as the council, in which we consult one another. And it's a space where we use each other to process. So Jerry was saying, clearly, I'm an external processor because what do you do, Jerry?
Yeah. So I send audios, and the difference between our comfortability in sharing our feelings and how long these are, right? And if anybody out there can relate to, I just love an audio message. It's such a great way to be able to share what you're feeling at a time that's convenient for you and somebody can listen later. And so what's helpful, and oftentimes on our council thread, we'll say, it's okay if you can't listen. I'm just
Yeah.
putting this out into the space because processing those emotions outwardly and knowing that it's sort of even going into the ethers of a safe space with people that love you and accept you as you are where you are is just an incredibly healing thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we do it differently. I
Right.
am at the end of the spectrum where I hesitate. So now I have to acknowledge those things. And these are
Right.
relationships. This is relationship work to say, wow, I hesitated to say this to you all because fill in the blank. And Jerry is amazing at using it and will share whenever she needs us and just creates this really amazing example of actually using relationships sometimes to manage relationships, right? And so this processing, we all may do it differently, right? Like just as I was saying last week at the different ends of the emotional spectrum, it's not that I actually feel less feelings than Jerry, but growing up I wasn't as connected to all the different feelings on the spectrum, and it took getting into adulthood and doing all this therapeutic work to go, wow, I have this really wide spectrum of emotion within a day, within a week, and beginning to get okay with it because part of not feeling it was actually not wanting to feel it. And, I said the word superstitious a moment ago because it's like, well, what happens if I feel this? Am I going to show it? Are people going to notice I feel it? And is that going to destabilize something for someone else? Or if I were to feel this, is there going to be a beginning and an end? This is something I run into with my clients all the time. The fear of feeling something. Like there's not
Right.
going to be a beginning and an ending to that feeling, and how to feel like we have the power and control to contain. And then
Yes.
what's going to happen if I create a feeling in another person standing across from me while I'm
Yes.
trying to share this thing that's
Oh,
vulnerable for me?
Mhm. Yeah, and even what you're talking about,
Mhm.
being worried how somebody else is going to process it. We talked about this a little last week with people pleasing
Right.
and really trying to, which all of that is because you care. You care about other people, but really in that you're suppressing something that you need in order to do something for someone else, which is sort of going through this process of also assuming
I
they
was
can't
going to
hold
say we're
space
making all
for
these
you,
predictions. We make
right?
predictions about
Yes,
how someone's going to feel. We make predictions
right.
about what is going to happen for them. And we play these
Yes.
stories forward. And we won't catch at times even that we've decided that something's a reality when we actually just created this scenario in our head.
Mhm,
And it's really interesting how we have these tendencies to assume that the people who
mhm,
care about us
mhm.
don't want to hear these things and won't want to support us and will
Yes.
respond negatively or be negatively impacted. When if we turn the tables and I say, would you want your friend to say this to you? Would you want your partner
Right.
to talk about this
Right.
with you? It's
Right.
always like a quick, well, yeah.
Sure. And it
And
makes
so,
sense.
yeah,
It makes sense, right? Because if we were taught that when I share this thing that I'm scared to feel right now and I'm scared to share right now,
yeah,
that the response I'm gonna get is, "I can't handle this." Then it makes so much sense why we would assume that that's how everybody else in the world will operate. And
hmm,
that's why what we're talking about, like our council thread is a safe space for me to share. And I wouldn't share the things that I share with that thread with everyone
right.
because not everybody is going to be able to process it
Mhm.
and not everybody is going to I trust that when I'm sharing there, I know deeply that who I'm sharing with has the ability to say I don't have the capacity for this now or that they will wait until they have the capacity
Yeah.
and there won't be judgment.
I just want to say here that if you're sitting and you're listening and you're like, I don't have those people, therapy, coaching programs like Jerry's, they're here in our world actually because they are a platform through which to begin to heal this stuff and to have a place and a person and reliable people, if you're in a group, to be able to do this work. There are
Yes.
places in our world that are designed for
Mhm.
this so that
Mhm.
no one has to feel like they can't access it.
Mm.
And that's the point of this work that we're doing, that we don't all have those people in our life at all
Yes.
times. But I can tell you that when you start doing these things and you start doing this work, you start actually finding more ease and finding the right people in your
Mhm.
life.
Yes.
We start to choose differently after we
Mhm.
start doing this work, and we'll be surrounded by more people who are comfortable doing this with us and who appreciate hearing and who aren't looking for us to just gloss over things. And it's great.
Yes, I didn't always have that, right?
Mhm.
So it was a process of searching and my heart is so warm hearing what you're saying because, I was thinking about this in reflection of you asked me like, "What's my story? How did I get started?" And really it was in not wanting people to feel alone, and there were so many times that I did feel alone.
Yeah.
And so truly to anyone listening that's like, "I want a counsel thread." I want to be able to have people that do that. That's what this is about. The more you
Yeah.
start to know your emotional world, the more you're able to start to figure out if certain relationships in your life maybe don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
But it's not a reflection of your wants and needs being bad or something that shouldn't be honored or respected, which
Right.
often
Right.
is what is messaged is that the way you
Yeah.
are isn't okay, which
Mhm.
is part of what I hope my work helps people do is understand actually your authenticity is exactly what we need. You are
Yeah.
exactly right and perfect how you are, being imperfect and being somebody who likes and wants whatever you need and doesn't like and doesn't want whatever
Yeah.
you don't.
Yes,
And
and what's beautiful is that you start doing that and living that way, it gives permission to other people to do it. The
yes.
more you share on that thread, the more I'm like, okay, yeah, share something. Like actually say it out loud. And there's this difference you were saying between the ways in which we are internal versus external processors. And, you were joking, like clearly I'm an external processor. I clearly am an internal processor.
Mhm.
I have gotten the message more than once from therapists that I've worked with that I think a lot. I'm like, I spent so much
Right.
of my life thinking through that. It's actually why I now do so
Mhm.
many practices that are built to help people get out of thinking and get out of their heads, because I spent so much time just trying to figure it all out myself without putting it outside to anyone else to support me, to help me to see it a different way.
So, in terms of like internal processing, right? So often it's around not feeling safe to share openly, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's so many ways that we can learn how to start processing. So,
Yeah.
writing. It's a safe space because there is nobody responding to you with judgment. There's a really beautiful thing to think about in the art of conversation, of difficult conversation, of processing your emotions, and it's the power of the pause. So, between stimulus and response. So, stimulus being the thing that's affecting us emotionally.
And I'll just
Yeah,
say to everyone, if you listen to the episode on the nervous system, which Jerry cued everyone to last week, we talk about actually just feeling our responses. And so you might not recognize your patterns, but if you start to feel your body just responding, right?
right. Right. Having that awareness of your body, like you're saying, is huge because it is cueing us to there's an emotion present. Emotion is energy in motion. That is what it is. So when our heart is racing, we're probably feeling something. And like we talked about last week, we talked about the difference between thinking your emotions and feeling your emotions. So processing how how can I start to feel safer in my body when I'm feeling this thing? Now, feeling safer doesn't mean feeling comfortable,
Ooh, that's tough,
right?
right? Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. My sister and I used to jokingly say that to each other all the time because it's so uncomfortable, and it's
Yes.
so
Yes,
human to want to avoid, dodge, and
it
disconnect in
is.
moments of discomfort. And
It
so,
is.
you're cueing us to do this thing of taking this pause in a moment of discomfort.
Mhm. Yeah. When we're pausing in this moment of discomfort to, again, and this is very hard, and we can learn a lot about ourselves if we're like, I can't do that. I can't figure that out. But that's more information, which
Yeah.
is to be compassionate with ourselves in these moments when we're pausing. And then more emotions might come up because it's like, well, I don't know how to do that. I wasn't taught that. I
Hmm.
wasn't loved for feeling this thing. That's part of it. I wasn't
Yeah.
seen. I wasn't heard. I can't do this. But
Yeah.
we're at the gold right there. We're at the gold. Like that is where the growth edge is being able to do that. Now, finding people we can do that with that are able to hold space and process with us in a way where they're not messaging, I can't do this,
Yeah.
right? Or knowing how to say, I don't have the capacity right now. Those are still safe people. But those are also humans. They're actually communicating in a healthy way where they're at and what they need. And so then we're able to turn back to ourselves and realize, okay, maybe I need a therapist. Maybe I need a coach. Maybe I
Yeah.
need to find some trusted other
Yeah.
that can hold space for me, or maybe journaling, maybe meditating, maybe
Yeah.
taking more of a pause. Maybe it's going for a walk, somatically, just getting it out of your system in a way that is able to process through you. But going through it is getting to the other side. Avoiding is information because you're still having the emotion. It's just saying something about not feeling comfortable processing it.
Exactly.
Our emotional experiences are different. There's so much nuance here. It's just you. It's just you and your thoughts. And then hopefully over time, it's you and your emotions because
Yeah.
that's what's feeling unsafe is to go from thinking to feeling. And oftentimes, not always, but sometimes people can think, I am this emotion, and this emotion feels really scary. And you are not the emotion, you are the person feeling this emotion,
Stay right there. You are not this emotion. You are the person feeling this emotion. And then when you
right?
become that observer, you are observing. What's the benefit of actually separating in that way?
Yeah, the benefit of separating in that way is allowing yourself to feel in control of your emotional world. And what that doesn't mean is being controlling. It means that now having this emotion doesn't have to feel overwhelming. It can feel like something you can process now because now you're the
Mhm.
observer. So
Yeah.
to see all emotions as valid and something that we can experience, really taking away the connotation that this is good or bad starts to help us again lean into compassion and curiosity.
Yeah.
Being the observer gives us this opportunity to get curious about our emotional world. But
And
if we're in it, if we are in it and we're going, I am this.
yes, like getting out of, so it's this degree of separation, like you're saying, we actually, if we are joined with that emotion,
Mhm.
we are in it. Notice the difference when this happens to you. Can you step back and take a neutral stance on what you're feeling? No, it's like when we take that pause and we go, okay, I am feeling overwhelmed. And then we have to break overwhelmed down into actual feelings, right?
Mhm.
So, like, what am I feeling? As soon as you go disappointed, ashamed, embarrassed,
Mhm.
people can exhale more easily. When we actually label those feelings versus getting out of that umbrella statement of overwhelmed or being so over attached to the feelings that we are just getting taken for a ride, when we can step back and name the feelings, it actually has a physiological effect of starting to ground us. So that nervous
Yes.
system rise or that detachment that happens with our nervous system in response to whatever we're feeling, when we can name it, we actually are sending a signal to our body that, okay, we're okay. Maybe we're not done feeling that feeling, but that's the piece of control that I think you're describing. It's like it puts us in the driver's seat, and then we get to choose
Yes.
what we do next. If we don't do that, we don't do anything next. We're just in the feeling.
Exactly. And it's not just that it puts you in the driver's seat, but it puts you in the driver's seat, acknowledging that feeling being in the car and
Mhm.
not saying, get out of the car as fast as you can. Or if you're in the car, shut up and sit down,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
acknowledging and identifying from a place of compassion. And this is really where we can start to parse out our emotional history, like our emotional heritage, and what we learned about what emotions were not allowed, what was made to feel like we need to suppress this in order to be someone who can be accepted and belong. That's those people pleasing perfectionist tendencies and all of those things come up from here. But how beautiful is this? Because the first step, like if we're to go, okay, give me like a crash course, identify, process, release. And those are the 3 steps that can take us through this journey, but it's not that easy, right? We're saying it's hard. It is
Yeah.
hard, but it's continuing to come back to, I can pause. People can feel uncomfortable with the pause because that probably means what? That an emotion's gonna come up, and we can't just think our way out of this. We have to feel it. We have to feel our way through it, and feeling can be really scary, right?
Yeah.
It's emotion. And if you
Yeah.
are feeling fear around this, that is so normal. And what both Ashley and I are saying is there are people that do have the capacity to hold space for you.
Mhm.
It can help you learn that processing your emotions, no matter what they are, is a beautiful thing to help you get to the other side of having healthy, conscious relationships, learning more about yourself, and hopefully getting to the point where you live in a more authentic way, true to yourself, because we need you, right?
Yeah.
I believe that we need each and every person that's out there right now to be living their most authentic lives because we all have a gift. And if we're suppressing to show up a certain way because we're seeking approval, this or that, then we're not able to get to this point where we're really truly leaving the legacy we want to live,
Yeah.
not looking back going, "Oh man, I didn't say that thing because I was afraid that that person was going to feel this thing."
Yep.
This allows you to really pause and be with yourself.
Yeah. And what's interesting about this is that there's a very wide spectrum of what actually communicating our emotions and processing our emotions can look like. What you're reminding me of that I want to say out loud is part of using relationships isn't always that direct communication about something that's problematic in the relationship. Using relationships can actually just look like, hey, I'm feeling super in my head insecure today. So it's not always about using relationships to process relationships. It's like learning how to use our relationships to be in the process of our lives and actually acknowledge what's going on for us. Because if I don't say it out loud, or I don't do something that is effective on my own, because I can do a lot of things that are ineffective in my internal processing, right? So if I don't do something that is effective on my own, which for me looks like
Mhm.
a different kind of journaling than when I am just repeating what's in my head. Or it might look like actually doing a certain type of meditation or taking a walk and getting outside or doing something that's stimulating or stabilizing for my nervous system, right?
Mhm.
So those are some of my internal processes. But when it comes to relationships, a huge part of what we're talking about isn't just facing hard conversations in relationships.
Mhm.
This building block of actually just being in relationships and starting to like really be ourselves and say what's real
Mhm.
for us and be
Yeah.
vulnerable and acknowledging that and
Yeah.
practicing being in emotion with other human beings, you know?
Mhm.
And then we can get to this place that we're going to get to today of these difficult conversations. But for some people, even just like being and acknowledging how we are in a real way, like, hey, you know what? I actually don't feel like going there tonight. Here's what I'm
Yes.
feeling. Here's what
Yes.
I need.
And also not managing other people.
Yeah.
That's not your job. Your job is really to focus on you and starting to trust that other people are focusing on them.
What does it mean to manage other people? What would that look like?
Right. So when we were talking about people pleasing, for example, people pleasing is a way to manage. So you are trying to manage how other people see you and possibly not wanting to deal with the uncomfortable emotions that come with disappointing someone. So
So
you're
we're also
essentially
trying to
managing.
manage how they feel. So we're trying
Yes.
to, like, for a lot of people, that looks like coming into a room, taking the temperature and going, okay,
Right.
they don't look like they're in a good mood. Well, I'm not going to do anything that could further
Right.
provoke that.
Yes.
So, Jerry, part of this is that we will have patterns that we hold right now that we might not be aware of, and some that we may be aware of, and they might not be working for us. So, not to judge that, but when we walk into that room and we do find ourselves taking the temperature of the people
Mhm.
around us, how do they feel? How are they presenting? And we might notice some of that patterning showing up, that desire to kind of morph and manipulate how we present to fit that situation in a safe and comfortable way. What do you say to people when they're recognizing these patterns?
Yeah. So I say props to you for noticing because that's step one, right? And noticing that we have coping mechanisms to protect us. So we're talking a lot about this because sometimes they're not healthy and they're not
Mhm.
productive, but they are protecting us,
Yeah.
right? They are helping us in a way, but not necessarily if our goal is to be more conscious of ourselves and the relationships we have. So that's kind of what we're talking about is looking at our processing from this lens of, okay, I am emotionally processing now, but maybe it's not actually helpful to me
Yeah.
with the things that I want. If you're wanting healthier relationships, you're wanting to break those patterns from your past.
Yeah.
Part of that is this pausing and noticing and consciously noticing your environment is really different than people pleasing, trying to manage other people's emotions because we want to be accepted. And
Yeah.
so this is where that need, which is a human need to attach, right? Looking at attachment and authenticity and their relationship because attachment means connection, belonging, loving, being loved.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't often actually define that. I think a lot of people have heard a lot about attachment styles. Are you an insecure or secure attachment, anxious attachment? But
Right?
we don't often break down what is attachment. And I think that that's such a important point that you're making, that it is a foundational hardwired desire that we will have within us because it's a function of our biology. Like, we
Mhm.
actually, as human beings, are programmed to seek attachment.
Yeah. And, Gabor Mate, when he's talked about authenticity and attachment, something that he said is that we're born with this need for authenticity and attachment. And in that,
God.
most people abandon their true selves. That's that authenticity, which we need to please others, people pleasing, and keep the relationships, which is those attachments, even if they are toxic and destructive.
So even if the relationships are toxic and destructive, we will abandon our authentic self to preserve the relationship. Why do you think that is?
Right. So, one of the things that he talks about is when authenticity threatens the attachment, attachment trumps authenticity.
Ah, that is such an interesting thing. The attachment will trump our relationship with self and being ourselves, to have that connection, to have belonging,
Right.
to be with others. We will
Yes,
abandon ourselves. I think that a
exactly.
lot of us see that in earlier ages and stages of our lives, and then later are apt to probably judge it, the things that we
Hmm.
do in,
Hmm.
like, elementary, middle, high school, to feel safe in connection, to feel a sense of belonging and acceptance. But that really, that's something.
Exactly. Yeah, and as we evolve, because this is just such a primal instinct. It is
Mhm.
literally hardwired into who we are as humans. There is not a person that can get away from this being part of who they are. And so this is where when we want to be radically responsible, which is part of my practice, is not being the victim of your pain points and your traumas, but really being radically responsible for, okay, these things happen to me, but I am now in charge of what I do to have, if your goal is to have a conscious relationship with yourself and other people, I can start to notice these things. I can notice my coping mechanisms. I can notice how I emotionally process. And am I suppressing my authentic voice to keep
Mhm.
this attachment?
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of big questions that might come about. Is this relationship actually serving me in the way that allows me to live my full potential and my full truth? And the
Mhm.
answer might be no. And
Well,
then
and
you
I
have
think
to
that
sit with
right.
uncomfortable emotions. And we kind of come back
Yeah.
to this point
Yeah.
of, how do I sit with uncomfortable emotions when I have them?
Right. And I think, like what you just said, the fact that we are apt to abandon our authentic selves to just preserve a relationship. I mean, that means that there's a part of us that fears. And this is, for so many of us, then, if this is a common thread through humanity, that don't believe that we can have the relationship as we would want the relationship to be. So we must abandon ourselves in order to just maintain whatever this is, to make it
Right.
work.
Right. And just even saying this, it makes me think of anybody who's listening, myself, you, just
Hmm.
having so much compassion for these different versions of ourselves throughout
Yeah.
our life, where we were like, yep, I learned that I couldn't be this or do that in order to be loved and liked and accepted.
Yeah.
I mean, that is everybody's story. Everybody can start to tell you what that looks like, right? I can
Hmm.
think of so many stories in my life where that's true for me, and how we will continue, if we look at those patterns of relationship, to draw in these lessons until we integrate it into our system and go, you
Oh,
know
yeah.
what? No more. I am not
Yeah.
interested anymore in having non reciprocal relationships where people can't hold space for me. I
Hmm.
am wanting to have real conscious relationships where we're both doing our work to understand ourselves and do so through a lens of compassion,
Yeah.
because only until we've done that deeper work, right? Like, so a teacher that I really admire is Pema Chodron. And the way that she goes about talking about compassion is about how compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. So only when we know our darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
compassion becomes real when we recognized our shared humanity. So compassion for other people begins with kindness to ourselves. And so all of this is leading to, no matter what your emotional experiences, you're not alone in, you're actually in good company. We all want to feel loved, heard, seen, and needed. And this is where we get to kind of parse out how to do that for ourselves first. So then we can start to have these conscious relationships, because when things do get hard, and they will get hard, and things will be complicated, we can be in charge, be radically responsible to how we are showing up, understanding our emotional world, so we can show up in the best way and hopefully start to have healthier, more conscious relationships that lead to connection, and doing so in a way that doesn't suppress our true selves.
Jerry, I'm hearing you talk about the way to have these relationships that can be better for us. And yet I know what it's like to have resistance to doing some of these harder things, these more vulnerable things, for example, right? So, what is it about knowing ourselves that actually can pave the way to approaching relationships in a way that can feel safe and comfortable, that we can then have the kind of relationships that we really want deep down, that we might be going, I don't know if it's possible for me based on my past experiences, right?
Yeah. So, what you're describing is becoming more conscious of yourself, which is the path towards conscious relationship. Consciousness, having an awareness of yourself, having a consciousness about how you're relating and what you're doing, noticing what is my tone? What is my body language? What am I feeling?
Yeah.
Am I hungry? Am I tired? Some really basic things that are going to impact the way that you're relating to other people. And what this looks like is finding people that are also doing this work. And so it's kind of starting to have your own file system for yourself. So, what triggers you? What are your vulnerabilities? These are things that are so important because if you don't know, right? Like last week, we talked about wants and needs. Those are
Yeah.
really important too, right? And something that is also equally important is knowing what your triggers are because when you're sharing with somebody who you're hoping is emotionally safe, right? You're hoping that there's somebody that can take your vulnerabilities and really handle them with care. That's what we're assuming in the scenario is that
Yeah.
sort of that the person that you are sharing with is able to do that, but you'll discover if they can't,
Well, that's the point.
right?
Yeah. So it's like we might not have a guarantee. We don't have a
Right.
guarantee with our safest, most tried and true people.
Yes.
And so it's like even when you have practiced honesty, it's just honesty. Like, this is
Mhm.
honestly what I'm feeling. This is my honest state right now. Here's
Yeah.
honestly what's in my head, even if there's a part of me that knows I might be making up some of this. I might be assuming some of this, but I'm going to be honest about what I'm about to say to you, right? I think
Yeah.
honesty is a huge part of what I'm hearing you describe. And honesty is something I think a lot of us value and we might not
Yeah.
realize, and then no
Yeah.
judgment, but we might not realize we're like not actually being honest about what's going on for us. We might not be telling someone that we've been
Yes.
upset by them. We might not tell someone what our real lived day to day experience is, maybe because we're trying to spare them, maybe because
Mhm.
we fear their reaction. But right,
Yes.
coming into this situation, being honest about what's happening, and it might feel vulnerable every time, but that vulnerability, I think the dial gets turned down a bit,
Yeah.
that we learn not necessarily that we can control and contain or that they're going to respond a certain way, but what we learn instead is just I can tolerate and I know what to do for myself in response to however they respond.
Yes, yes. You're building the muscle every time you try it. And you're also learning something about you and the other person. It's not about judging, am I doing this perfect?
Yeah.
Right? We've talked about this. It's you're not doing it perfect. None of us are. That's what the human experience is, doing it imperfectly, but doing it anyway. And something that I'm hearing you say is bringing me to this really simple way of thinking about direct communication that clear is kind. Sharing something in a clear way that's true for you, being honest with yourself about how you really feel, and maybe the blocks that are in your way of sharing. This is where it lives. This is where that hard stuff lives, right? It
Yeah.
lives in these places on, oh, yes, I really do feel upset with this person. And I'm trying to suppress it because I want to avoid disappointing them or I want to avoid the difficult
Right.
conversation and those feelings that come from telling somebody that I love and care about, I'm really sad, I'm really afraid, or I'm really
Yeah.
upset. And so if we don't allow ourselves to get to the point of actually saying the thing, we can't practice it.
Yeah.
It just lives inside of us. And then it might manifest in ways that again, we might be processing it, but we might be processing it in a way that's hurting us or
Yeah.
that's detrimental to us, which could include suppressing our true self.
Yeah. Yeah. Even in hearing you say that, like step one, the honest communication can be, I'm really scared to communicate this.
Yes. It
Yeah.
can be it is that simple. It's that simple because you've just started the journey of letting someone know where you are.
Yep. And
because
you named how you felt for yourself, and now you've named it for them.
and that actually creates a more emotionally safe experience because then you're letting the other person on their own. You're not managing them. You're trusting and hoping, right? We don't know. It
Mhm.
is a risk. You're hoping that they're able to hear you say, this is vulnerable for me.
Yeah.
You're trusting that they're able to then come at the conversation from a place of going, I hear you. And maybe they can't. That's possible,
Yeah.
and there's ways to process that, but without actually journeying into the vulnerable places of putting yourself out there again after you've been wounded time and time again in
Yep.
your life, you're not going to experience the connection on the other side.
And what is so interesting about, just hearing you say that is we were talking about earlier about going into a room and taking a temperature and how it will predict forward what will happen if we were to say and do this thing. So we don't actually allow ourselves and the other person the opportunity to know how much of it is real. And so this is like a healthier way of taking the temperature. It's saying out loud, I'm afraid to talk to you about this thing.
Mhm.
And now you've allowed them to be a part of taking the temperature on this situation. And you might learn that this is charged for them or that it's hard for them or that they're feeling sad or that they're feeling vulnerable. But now you're learning about how they feel as you're expressing how you feel.
Right. And, and really talking about the practicality that this isn't going to look perfect. So let's say you've braved into the world of I'm going to be vulnerable and say the thing that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
That is still a win, even if the other person can't hold space for you. It still means that you're exercising the muscle.
This is actually about learning in action in a way. This reminds me of what we were talking about in that first episode where we were saying we don't need to wait until we are completely healed and we know everything to begin to be in relationship again. It's about getting to a place where we know ourselves enough to start to approach our relationships in a way that's working better for us. And we're going to continue to see ourselves and see our patterns in relationships as we go. And we're going to continue to learn. And then we're going to be able to apply that. Without relationships, though, we're not going to be able to learn because if we stay isolated, we're not going to have the opportunities to grow, nor will we have the opportunities to connect.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And relationships are an experiential playground essentially, and I think that we should look at it that way. We should look at it as playing with these parts of ourselves that have come up throughout the course of our life, and this is where consciousness and mindfulness is really important because if we're not conscious and mindful, then we could be harmful to
Yeah.
ourselves, harmful to other people, and this is where we have to pivot, right? When those things come up, and they absolutely will because you're human, that the difference between being self destructive or relationally destructive is that consciousness because it
Mm-hmm.
allows us to go, oh, okay, I just said something I didn't mean. Wow. Can we talk about it? And giving the relationship the opportunity to breathe instead of running away from what we're scared of, which is that possibly this relationship can't meet my needs, or this person will judge me if I tell them how I really think or feel. And all of those things could be true, but we
Yeah.
won't know if we don't venture into the conversations that are really difficult to have. Starting to share, being direct in a way that allows the other person to hear us because we can often put our own spin on what someone's saying through all of our life experience. And so,
Mm-hmm.
something that I often will ask in conversation is, am I getting this right?
There you go. How do I know if it's my interpretation or theirs? We have to ask. We have to
Yeah,
actually ask if we have heard correctly in order to
right,
listen. It means that we have to, at times, cross check. We have to actually say out loud what we've heard to see if we're right. Because our
right,
interpretation, and this is not because we're trying to even do it, we will automatically interpret through the lens of our own experience because that's all we know. We don't actually know that other person's experience. And that's kind of necessary to understand too. It's like we don't really know what it's like to be in the other person's shoes. And listening is about trying to see what it would be like to stand in them. But we might need more information from that person to really know what their experience is like. And we need to ask them if we're right about what we're hearing.
yeah. And when we're having this moment, this is where it's difficult, right? Difficult conversations. we are probably going to have an emotional response to this because we have, as we know, access to all of those emotions, even if we don't feel we have full permission to feel them. This is where we get to really practice in our most intimate relationships when we're having this moment where someone's sharing how they feel, let's say towards us, right?
Mhm.
Maybe they're telling us they're disappointed. Maybe they're telling us they're frustrated, something like that. It
Mm.
might draw in us an emotion. And this is where we get to do our work because we get to
Yes.
slow down. So you could slow down
Mhm.
if you're triggered. When you say that to me, I'm really noticing my heart is racing a lot. So I just need a second because I want to respond to you in a way that makes you feel heard. That
Yeah.
probably feels so much better to the person than trying to jump in and do
Make it
so
right.
right. Right.
We have two forms of defensiveness, and I think that this is something that's interesting we don't talk about a lot. One of them is, "You're wrong, I'm right." I think that's what we typically think of
Mhm.
as defensiveness, but the other
Right.
type of defensiveness comes up when we become uncomfortable because we feel like someone has been hurt by us, and we want to tell them what our true intention was. So we might become defensive
Right.
and want to explain ourselves, but if we start explaining ourselves before the person has really been heard, now we're not listening.
Right. Exactly.
Our
And
emotions will take us out of listening without us meaning to stop listening. But the trying to make the other person feel better, trying to make ourselves feel better, trying to disconnect from an uncomfortable situation,
right.
but to like stay in a difficult feeling and stay with another person, that's hard. But that's what listening is.
It is. And we can find our way back to curiosity and compassion, which is really a more expansive way of having these conversations
Hmm.
and isn't easy to do when you're triggered. It's the noticing. It's coming back to that, right? Radical responsibility. Oh, I'm noticing I'm triggered. Being aware of that trigger
Yeah.
creates a more safe emotional environment for the person you're talking to because you're not denying it. You're not denying that it exists. You're not suppressing it. You're addressing it in the moment. It's looking at conflict as an opportunity to connect. And that's not easy. If you grew up in a house that was conflict averse, that was like, don't feel your feelings, don't talk
Yeah.
about your feelings, difficult conversations is off the table,
Hmm.
then the idea of having that difficult conversation, that emotion that could lead to conflict is the scariest thing. And that makes so much sense.
We can go into moments even with the greatest intention to communicate and to listen. But if we're also bringing a fear from a past experience, maybe someone yells at us. Maybe that was the pattern when we were young. If I say something that someone doesn't want to hear, they might yell. It might feel scary. So we might already be in our nervous system response before we've even said a word. And it's starting to practice, like you're saying, choosing who you practice these things with, knowing what you're feeling so you can name it and you can take care of yourself. I'm hearing you say, Jerry, it's like this stepwise process where first we might notice where we're coming from. Maybe when we were young, someone yelled in response to us saying things they didn't want to hear. Maybe we were ignored. We have these past experiences that have set us up for patterning. And so we might go into a conversation with someone or anyone at this point with an activated nervous system. We might have a lot of feelings of fear or a desire to run because we don't want to have those things repeat. So, first, we start by knowing ourselves and understanding what those feelings are and why they make sense, even if those threats aren't present today. And then we choose the safe people to start to practice communicating these things with. And we notice in the moment with those people, like I'm coming to this situation with a lot of the same patterning, the same baggage, like you were saying last week,
Yeah,
that I had before I started this process, because that baggage doesn't necessarily go away until we have some healing experiences with other human beings.
exactly. The art of difficult conversation is around this dance, the trigger dance, the regulation dance, the emotional dance, understanding these different parts of ourselves so we can be more conscious not only towards ourselves, but have relationships that feel really good to us, feel really safe
Mhm.
for us. And through that, we're healing together.
Yes. And, that makes me think again about your radical responsibility. Like, we can be radically responsible for what we're bringing to our half of the conversation and start to learn that we are not responsible for what the other person is bringing to that conversation. And in a way that can be freeing, when we look back on all these patterns of like trying to predict and wanting to cater to and trying to prevent. But when we start to learn this radical responsibility around like I can only control, but I can control what I'm bringing forward in this relationship. I think that there's so much just in that learning like, okay, I actually can be in control of this part of it. And being in control, it means caring for ourselves and also being able to carry ourselves through.
We can only be radically responsible for ourselves. And so this is where I think it's really important that we talked about knowing what you want and need. We were talking a lot about suppressing your needs and how that can show up in other
Yeah.
ways in our relationship. So really starting to understand what are your unmet needs in relationship. And so this
Yeah.
is where it's really important to know the difference between a request and a boundary and where that comes in terms of conscious communication. So, making a request using conscious relating tools, right? Communicating in a way that really honors yourself and respects the relationship because you clearly care about this other person. It's giving this other person an opportunity to meet or not meet that need. A request is just kind of like, hey, when we're talking about something that's really hard to talk about, it would mean a lot to me if you weren't on your phone because it feels like it's distracting and I feel like you're not paying full attention, right? So it would be
Yeah.
kind of
Good one.
like you're requesting it. There's a possibility that the person can't meet that need and that they won't or they won't, right? So
Right.
you've shared where you're coming from, you're processing that. This is what I need to feel most comfortable and safe in my body and in this relationship. So that's where, you hope that somebody can meet that,
Yeah.
but they might not be able to. And we can't control that. And we can look at all different types of relationships. It does not just mean romantic. Maybe it's
Yeah.
family that's like now part of your life that isn't necessarily someone that you were choosing that you're trying to have a relationship with, or it could be a coworker, right? And so
Yeah.
setting a boundary would be sort of the next phase of this. And setting a boundary where this is different is that boundaries are your responsibility. It is something that you are doing. It's not taking action to control someone else, it's you controlling yourself in the relationship to maintain your own homeostasis and your own internal direction of what you want in your life. So you're not feeling that resentment because you are aware of your wants and needs, which is step one. Because if you don't know what
Yeah.
you want and need, you can't set that boundary. A boundary is not you aren't allowed to do this thing. It's more, if you do this thing, this is what I will do in response. Like
And I
this
love
is
this. I hope everyone is hearing this differentiation. It's easy to think that boundaries are these things we're setting for someone else to maintain, right? And so hearing what you're saying, it's like I am saying out loud what I want or need and what I am going to do and that I am requiring myself to do
mhm, mhm.
to maintain something that for me is necessary, is going to keep me in health mentally, physically, emotionally.
Exactly. So setting a boundary is no longer a request because it's an action that you're going to take if X, Y, or Z happens. So it really
Yeah.
keeps you in control of your life and your relationships. But here's the kicker is that you really have to follow through with it. And that's a
Yeah.
really hard thing to do because with that comes what I like to say is like the big intense G emotions can come up. The heavy G emotions being guilt and grief. So
Yeah.
those are things that can accompany because sometimes people are going to cross our boundaries.
Yeah.
And then we're at that crossroads of, well, now I need to follow through with this action, which means possibly stepping away from this relationship. And I kind of go through these doors, right? Because a lot of people when they start doing boundary work, especially if they came from a boundary-less environment, they might have that pendulum swing to the direction where they're like, okay, and it feels really intense and it's a wall, right? Which is just
Yeah.
you exercising that
Right.
muscle.
Well, I just like to say that like, well, what's a boundaryless environment? Did anyone have parents who said something would happen if they did this? but it never happened? Did you grow up in a household where there would be a consequence that would be stated but never followed through on? This makes me think of parenting and how hard this is, like how hard it is to actually execute consequence and actually follow through and hold these boundaries, which I will tell you that we know from research with children that actually having boundaries helps kids feel safe. So when we have limitation and expectation, we are actually creating a relationship that says, this person is going to create safety for me. And we can think that it's going to make us a bad guy. And I say this in relation to kids, but this is how we feel with our friends. This is how we'll feel with our partners, our
Mhm.
coworkers. If we're in charge of people, especially for women, it can be really hard to hold boundaries, but
Mhm.
it creates safety, stability. It allows for people to expect consistency in us. And that
Mhm.
creates, again, a
Yes.
different kind of safety and trust in relationships, interestingly.
Yeah, and this is really a huge part of conscious relationships because you're really letting people know what you will and won't tolerate. A boundary is saying, like, this is not okay for me. And so if you're not taking action on that when you say it, then you're mixed messaging to the person that you're in a relationship with, which does create confusion. And like we
Yeah.
said, clarity is kindness. And so it's also important when you're exercising this muscle, and it's not about being perfect, it's about trying it,
Yeah.
is to remember that it takes time and that if you're consciously relating, you can still be responding to other people in a way that is loving and compassionate, but clear and direct. Because as we're learning to honor our needs, we're allowing other people to meet us or not meet us. This is firmly and compassionately stating your boundary in a way that just honors who you are. And energetically, you're really sending something to yourself. You're saying, I respect myself enough and our relationship enough to be honest with you about where I am even though this is hard, right? The art of difficult
Yes.
conversations.
Yes. Well, and it's so preventative of resentments. Like we said earlier, resentments come of these moments when we're not honest about our experience with people.
Right,
And it's as
right.
simple as that. It's not that we are dishonest people, but whatever the stories are in our mind or the patterns in
Mhm,
our life that keep
mhm.
us from saying like, "Hey, this is really hard for me."
Yeah,
I might be hiding from you that I am negatively impacted. And so now I am
mhm,
telling you I'm actually negatively impacted. And that gives you the opportunity to go, oh,
mhm.
I didn't know. Because
Yeah,
people can't know what we are feeling until we tell
right,
them.
right. They're
We
not
might
mind readers.
hope, we will hope that people are mind readers. And I want everyone to stop and just think about that. Like, do you ever just wish that everyone knew what you wanted, what you
Mhm.
needed, what you were thinking, and what you were feeling? You might
Right.
actually be walking through life thinking people really do, because I think we all go through that phase too. Like, well, they should
Yeah.
have known. They should have known. Well, if
Yeah,
you didn't tell them, maybe not. So it's giving people the opportunity to do better in our relationship, and it's taking that challenge of
yeah.
being open and really being honest about our wants and needs and acknowledging them is so hard. It's hard to be assertive. It's
It
really easy
is.
for some of us to
It
be
is.
passive or passive aggressive, to even
Mhm.
go toward aggressive, but to like be in that uncomfortable place of clear communication. It's hard until it's normal.
Yeah, and you know what? That's where when you start to look at conflict as an opportunity to connect,
Mhm.
then the art of difficult conversations just feels like more information for you to get closer to this person or
Yeah.
realize if this person can't respect your wants and needs, then maybe what you do need to do is take those actions that you say. So, I was mentioning some of the gates that I go through if you don't want the pendulum to swing all the way to the other side. I was talking earlier about when you come from a boundaryless environment and maybe the pendulum swings when you're just starting to exercise this muscle
Got it. Yeah.
pendulum swinging to that direction where you're like, I'm putting up walls. That's kind
Mhm.
of how people see it. Boundaries are doors, they're information that help people love us best and for us to love ourselves best,
Yeah.
right? And so the ways to kind of go through certain doors, noticing what your non negotiable needs are. These are the things you will not tolerate no matter what. So let's say you're talking about intimate relationships. So, for me, something that's really important is for the people that I'm talking to speak to me in a compassionate and kind way. right? If we're talking about something difficult, that's conscious communication. And if you can't, that's okay. Sometimes we can't, sometimes I
Hmm.
can't. But to know yourself enough to say, I can't have this conversation. And so for me, if this conversation is going to get to the point where there's any name calling or you're raising your voice,
Yeah.
then I'm going to step away from this conversation. That's a boundary. That's what
Right.
I'm going to do if this happens because I
And I
love
think
you and
that,
I love our
yeah,
relationship enough for me to do that because nothing productive can come from this. But this is what I will do. So that is not, I'm leaving the relationship. I hate
hmm,
you. I'm going away. It's a gate, right? So
right.
it's really but what happens if you state this and you do that, you leave the room, but then the person keeps going or they keep walking over your boundaries. There
Yeah.
is a point, that's where that like guilt and grief can come in, where you may have to make the decision that this relationship is crossing your boundaries too much. And so maybe another gate is taking a little step away from the relationship for a period of time. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And then eventually, maybe you realize this isn't a relationship that serves me in my life.
Yeah.
And that can come with some really hard emotions. And that's where we can, like I was saying, circle back to how do you emotionally process? And it gives you some space too, because you're spending a lot of energy and time, whether it's like you were saying, holding back from sharing with people because you're
Yeah.
worried about disappointing them or how they're going to react. You're spending a lot of energy and effort, or you're spending a lot of time if people are crossing your boundaries. You can get to the point where you realize, you know what? I want to make space and room for people that are really going to help me flourish and thrive by
Yeah.
really allowing me to feel spacious,
Right. There's
and
something else in this too that I think, one, thank you for saying this because I think a lot of people are like, well, I'm trying to do this. And what
yeah.
happens if it doesn't go well and it doesn't feel safe or comfortable or reciprocated?
Mhm. Yeah.
The other part of that stepping away might actually allow re-engagement because if we don't step away, likely we're also not holding to those boundaries we're setting. So if we're saying to
Right.
someone, I can't allow communication like this, I can't allow
Mhm.
this because this isn't good for me, this isn't healthy for me, this isn't good for
Yeah.
us, but then I keep
Yeah.
allowing it and I don't step away from that, right?
Right.
Then I'm actually sending a different message. My boundary is
Totally.
actually different than what I'm stating. And so that
Mhm.
stepping away can allow both people to go, can we
Yeah.
operate in the way that is actually functional for both of us? But until we truly hold that
Mhm.
boundary and follow
Yeah.
through,
Yep.
change is highly unlikely to happen, because in that scenario, we are part of engaging with it. So, that I think that this is really helpful to look at it through this lens of these gates.
Yeah, it really gives the opportunity for the relationship to breathe, to pause. We were talking about the pause, and
Hmm.
also to revive safety and create more trust in the relationship. It's a dance, right? Just like we were talking about knowing your triggers. If you're doing the art of difficult conversations, it's knowing if you're and knowing yourself, right? Being radically responsible to your own body language. Are your
Hmm.
teeth gritting? Is your voice raising? Do you have a scowl on your face? Are your arms crossed? These are indicators for your own body. Oh gosh, I might be triggered here. This isn't just about the other person because imagine, like I think about this. Imagine if everybody in the world was this radically responsible, conscious relating person, which
Hmm.
isn't going to be perfect all the time.
One of the things that I have seen hold true is that while we can't change other people, when we change ourselves, other people will follow and suit often. But
Exactly.
when we aren't changing in the ways that we need to change for ourselves, like practicing these things like requests and boundaries, the people around us probably aren't going to change with us. They aren't going to change in how they engage with us. So we can start with how we are engaging
Yeah.
outwardly, and it allows the opportunity for change to occur from the other side.
Yeah, and I think a really good place to start, like if anybody's listening to this and they're like, wow, this sounds really great, Jerry, but like, that's a big ask. You really can start with you because this really is about you having your own personal power around your life.
Yeah.
This isn't about other people. It's about you really feeling that freedom of, oh, wait, because sometimes it's hard to even imagine that it's
Yeah.
possible to have something different, but it is. And it starts with you and really getting clear, like we talked about last time. What do you want? and what do you need? And if you go into your needs, you can really start to find what's something I will not tolerate. What is something that
Yes.
makes my body feel so cringy? Where do you tighten up when somebody acts a particular way? And then you're starting to find your triggers. Getting to know your stuff, those bags, is such a huge way to begin your conscious relating journey. So then when other people are doing things, you feel, hopefully, even if it's uncomfortable, a little more comfortable, even if it's like 5% more the next time, because then it feels like you can take the training wheels off and you can ride your bike, you know?
Yeah.
But you can't do it unless you start. So you
I
can
love
start
this.
somewhere. Yeah. So, and here's the thing, if you are wanting to do this deep work on yourself, my Mirror to the Self program really takes you through this journey in a deep way. Obviously, listening to Ashley and I talk today, I hope you've taken nuggets from this podcast, the last one, and feel empowered. I want you to feel personal power and really taking control back of the things in your life that feel a little out of control, and remembering that you have access to these things within you all the time. And so we really go through these things in depth. And I also do one-off coaching where maybe you're just needing like a tune-up. That those those are great sessions because we can really just get in there and start to talk about emotions and relationships.
I love this. And Jerry, she's got so much more to offer and has supported so many women in making changes in their lives and in their relationships. Yeah, this work is hard work and it is some of the most rewarding work that you can do. So I encourage everyone to check out Jerry's website. The link is in the show notes. Just follow that link.
We really could talk about this, a part 3, a part 4, a part 5, but I know that, Ashley, with all this valuable information you've had on your podcast, if your listeners feel like they want a specific thing for us to talk about relationship-wise, I know Ashley is all ears.
Yeah,
So
always.
please reach out if there is a topic, because I would always love to come back because this just feels like fun to me to talk about
Yeah.
emotions and relationships. And I'm just so honored that I get to talk about this work because I really believe in it. And to all the listeners, I really believe in you. And I really think that this journey of uncovering your true self is possible for anyone. So thanks for
Yes.
listening. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Jerry. Thank you to all the listeners for being here each week. Even if you just showed up today, I hope you took something away. So make sure to subscribe, follow along. And if you have time, always appreciate a rate and review. It helps other people find this free resource. Thanks for being here and take good care.